If you're just joining, welcome to today's webinar, Meeting the Moment, Welcoming in Challenging Times. I'm Rachel Parrish, the Executive Director of Welcoming America, and I am so thrilled to welcome all of you to what is going to be a really timely and important conversation today. We have an amazing lineup of speakers for you, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but want to start with a few housekeeping items before I do that. If we could go to our housekeeping slide, which has disappeared on us, and that's okay. So I'll just share with everyone that this is going to be an off-the-record conversation today. We are going to be recording today's conversation. So if you signed up for the webinar or if you get our newsletter here at Welcoming America, you'll be receiving a copy of it. We are not going to be using the all view chat function today, but you can use your Q&A if you want to direct a question to any of our speakers today. And I'm excited to get into it. So let's just begin this conversation with a little bit of grounding in why we're having a conversation today about the moment that we're in. If you've been following the news or the debates, including last night's debate, you've probably heard a lot around the scapegoating of people with migrant backgrounds, immigrants. We saw a few weeks back some of the false claims and bigotry that were directed at Haitian Americans in Springfield, Ohio, later at people from Rwanda, Somalia, the DRC, and other African communities in nearby Dayton, Ohio. And it was very clear that Black immigrants specifically were the target and deeply felt the impact of this rhetoric in threats to their safety and well-being. And we also know that unfortunately, the escalation of hate speech and violence is also taking its toll on a much larger number of Americans, as residents of Springfield saw firsthand when they had to respond to bomb threats. And at the same time that we're seeing escalating mis and disinformation and fear, we are also seeing something really wonderful, which is so many Americans that are standing up for each other's shared humanity as neighbors. We saw that just recently here at Welcoming America during Welcoming Week in the thousands of events and millions of social media and earned media stories that talked about what we get to see every day here at Welcoming America, which is so many people and places stepping forward into a place of welcoming, leaning in from a position of values and of strength. Here at Welcoming America, we've worked for the last 15 years with communities to build a nation of neighbors and to create more inclusive places for everyone, including people with immigrant backgrounds. We've seen the power of people coming together and what happens when leaders and communities take a proactive approach to their narrative, to building community, and to creating an infrastructure that makes immigration not a threat, but an asset to communities. We wanted to bring this webinar together at a time where that work can feel especially challenging in this election season and also beyond, to not only think about how we can reject fear and division and hate, but also to continue the long-term work of building our resilience to these narratives, to continuing to form neighborly bonds, and to reinforcing and building a welcoming infrastructure that creates the foundation of a safe and thriving and healthy multiracial democracy for all of us, whether we've just arrived or have been in our communities for generations. I'm just really thrilled for the folks that are being spotlighted in our call today because they really reflect some incredible voices, expertise, and leadership, not only around the topic of building welcoming communities, but around zooming out to look at issues of political violence and how we move through this really challenging time. I am going to introduce them as we go through and start here with a presentation from Rachel Brown. And let me just say that Rachel is the founder and executive director of Over Zero, an organization that works to build resilience to identity-based violence and other forms of group-targeted harm. She's a recognized expert on confronting hateful and dangerous rhetoric, and her work for the past decade has focused on using communication to prevent violent conflict around the world. And Rachel is also a wonderful and gracious partner and friend who reached out personally in the wake of everything happening in Ohio to ask what could Over Zero do to support welcoming in this challenging environment. And that brings us to today's call. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Rachel. Thank you so much again for being here with us.
Thank you, Rachel. And also, I just want to say a note that I'm going to be sharing today about preventing and addressing political violence and other types of and identity-based violence and other forms of group-targeted harm. And these are heavy topics. And I hope that what I share today will only underscore the importance of the work of welcoming that you all are doing. So I want to thank you, Rachel, the Welcoming America team, and everyone who's on this call. I'm going to start by giving us some definitions of political violence, identity-based violence, and then I'm going to talk about the role of communication in leading to this type of violence and share some stories of resistance and resilience and what we can learn from them. So I first of all, on the next slide, want to just underscore that we really do political violence, identity-based violence, one of its impacts and one of often its intended goals is to make us feel like we don't have agency, like we don't have the ability to push back and shape the world around us and shape our society, and to disengage people as well as to mobilize people to violence. And so I really want to start with the assertion that we know that we have the power to help our communities resist and rise above political violence, which includes identity-based violence and the targeting of specific groups with harm. So let's start with understanding political violence and its drivers on the next slide. And we can move right along, Anthony, to the definition of political violence that we use at Over Zero is that political violence is violence that really controls or changes who benefits from or participates fully in political, economic, and sociocultural life. Political violence is a violence that's not only about harming its immediate victims, it's about impacting and shaping and influencing society at large, and specifically shaping who's able to participate in our public life and spaces. And so on the next slide, political violence, just to share a little bit about what it includes, doesn't only include physical violence. It also includes the coercive use of physical force, things such as threats, intimidation, and harassment. And the types of violence that it includes ranges from hate crimes, the targeting of groups at large based on their identity, to election-related violence and more. And often these different types of violence intersect. So you might have ongoing identity-based violence, group-targeted violence that gets exacerbated or becomes more extreme, for example, during an election period, as it tends to happen. This type of violence can be perpetrated by state or non-state actors, that's government or non-government actors. And it's just really important to know that in addition to its immediate targets, this type of violence is intended to impact communities and systems beyond them, whether it's shaping who feels comfortable to show up and vote, or who feels comfortable opening a business in a community, or just showing up to a public forum or event. Importantly, on the next slide, political violence shifts individuals and institutions away from democracy. And this is in all of its forms, including the type of identity-based group-targeted violence that we've seen in recent weeks. It is, again, meant to change who feels safe participating in society, to decrease public participation in civic life and democracy, to change key institutions by intimidating people away from them, such as the targeting of election workers. And violence, when it happens, seeks to self-justify. Violence is often used to justify further violence as revenge or retaliation. When violence begins to happen, it can become normalized, and it can be used by leaders to justify crackdowns and power consolidation. So violence often begets more violence. And what's really important is that when we address violence, we don't address just the violence itself, but we address the broader impact it has on society. If it's making people feel unsafe, our work to address violence includes making people feel safe and providing avenues for them to participate. For example, addressing political violence also means addressing the environment, the permissive environment that makes political violence more possible and more likely. So if we go to the next slide, we sometimes use this diagram to think about what we can do. That it's not enough to address an immediate incident of violence. We need to focus on prevention, which means changing the atmosphere of threat, changing the permissive environment that makes violence, again, more possible. Communication is part of that. And I'm going to talk next about how public narratives and rhetoric can create a permissive environment for violence and make it more possible and more likely. It's also important that we defuse that when there is already an atmosphere of heightened threat and violence, we anticipate and address flashpoints and escalating tensions as they occur, and that we set up the structures and systems and relationships and strategies to do so. And then, of course, when violence does happen, as we have seen in recent weeks with things like bomb threats, et cetera, that intimidate people, that cause an institution to shut down or be evacuated, we need to keep people safe in those immediate incidents and have plans to do so. But we also have to address their long-term impact of communities not feeling safe to participate, not feeling safe to go about their day-to-day lives. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk briefly, and we could spend days on this, but I just want to give a really quick overview about communication and violence. Next. At Over Zero, one of the core things that we focus on is this relationship, this intersection between communication and conflict. Communication and conflict are very inextricably linked. When you have large-scale violence that involves groups of people, it involves mobilizing people against others. And when I talk about communication, I don't just mean a slogan or a campaign. I also mean rhetoric from all sorts of formal and informal leaders, from political leaders to media, to faith leaders, et cetera. When I talk about communication, I mean all of the ways that we get and exchange information, from social media to an in-person conversation to a billboard that we drive by to an article of clothing that someone wears that signals an affiliation that they have. And because communication is the way that humans make sense of the world around us, it's the way that we understand where we belong. It's the way that we make sense of events as they occur. And it's also the only way that we collaborate together to do things, is through using communication. You really can't have the types of violence and conflict that we work on without the weaponization of communication. And there are really clear patterns of what this looks like. And I'm going to just give an overview of them. They come mainly from the work of someone called Jonathan Leader Maynard. And he has studied very extreme cases of identity-based violence where groups are targeted based on their identity at a really large scale: mass violence, genocide, mass atrocity. And he's identified very clear patterns across history and across contexts. And I think it's very informative for us to look at those patterns, because they teach us how to look at the kernels and the seeds and recognize them early on, especially because we know that this type of speech is often one of the earliest warning indicators of violence to come, especially when it is spread broadly in a society across many channels to really saturate the communication ecosystem, when it's reaching audiences that are capable of violence and mobilization, and when the messengers of it are influential and charismatic leaders in society. So what are these clear patterns? If we go to the next slide, at a really high level, this communication others. It identifies a group of people. It constructs an identity, any particular category. This could be on race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, et cetera. And it tells a story. It constructs this idea that an entire group of people poses an inherent existential threat, is inherently threatening, is already guilty, has already done horrible things, cost us our jobs, spread disease, caused done heinous crimes that are unspeakable and disgusting, and is also inherently less than human, right? And this can be in very overt ways, comparing groups of people to pests, rodents, dogs. It can also be in more subtle ways, using words like a swarm of people coming across the border is often something you might hear around immigration, and swarms obviously usually refer to bugs. Just as important as this type of othering and casting of a group as threatening guilty, dangerous, and not fully human, dehumanization, is communication that mobilizes. So if we keep clicking forward till we get to that, communication that mobilizes doesn't just talk about the other, it talks about the us. It constructs an identity in a group, an in-group that belongs, and says, in order to belong to our group and be a good member of our group and protect our group, you need to go along with these narratives and with this violence. This communication often attacks group members that say, hey, maybe we should humanize these people. Maybe this communication isn't okay. Maybe violence is not okay. It characterizes them as weak, traitorous, naive. It says that there's no alternative to violence. This group is so threatening, so much less than human. We can be really good moral people, but we're just trying to protect ourselves. It often says we're trying to protect women and children. It mobilizes these protection narratives, and often very drawing on very misogynistic notions of masculinity and what it means to be a good man. And it creates the argument that in order to build a positive future for ourselves, this violence is necessary. If we keep moving forward, I think a couple of slides to where it says this communication, what's important to know about this communication is that, the next slide, is that it not only mobilizes people to support violence, but it also, and this is really critical, and I think this is where, as you'll see in the case studies, there's a lot of room for us to act. It not only mobilizes often a very small percentage of the population towards violence, but it suppresses a majority. It makes those who wish to speak out against violence feel afraid to do so. So it silences them, it discredits them, it makes people feel overwhelmed and like there's nothing that they can do. It targets the people that are upstanders. It creates a sense of chaos and uncertainty and loneliness around taking action. And the thing about this is that we can really do something about it. I just want to take one moment to quickly say what is scapegoating, because it's what we're seeing in spades right now. Scapegoating is a tactic that really names a specific societal problem, either real or imagined, and blames an entire group for that problem. And it creates this us in need of protection and a threatening them, as I just mentioned, but it's really about picking a problem, generating anger, outrage, or panic about it, and then blaming a very specific group for that problem. And that's certainly what we're seeing in the recent narratives targeting people who are immigrants, refugees, et cetera. I want to use the last tiny bit of this presentation to talk about approaches to preventing political violence. And the reason I think it's just important to start with some shared definitions and an understanding of this phenomenon and how it works and how conflict entrepreneurs, for example, weaponize communication and what they do is so that we can understand what we can do to prevent it. So I'm going to tell two stories and talk about what they have in common and hope that I have time to talk about communicating about scapegoating. So I want to talk about Tuzla. Tuzla is a city in Bosnia that was able to resist violence throughout the civil war in the 90s. As war took place throughout the country, the citizens of Tuzla continued to live and work peacefully together. How and why did this happen? Early in the conflict, nationalists worked to influence local politics and media. But these national level conflict dynamics, even though they threatened to play out at the local level, multiple actors, multiple leaders in Tuzla engaged to address the threat. The next slide. The local mayor was incredibly involved. And what he focused on was saying, even though Tuzla was a city that had all of the different identity groups that were party to the conflict present, he built a unifying multicultural Tuzlan identity. He said, this is what it means to be Tuzlan. He gave public speeches around the city, reached out to diverse groups, literally went around the city talking, commissioned a song, set up sports games, and they really in the early stages of escalation to conflict, promoted a Tuzlan identity. And they said, the threat is not each other. The threat is the divisive rhetoric and the people and the attempts to stoke conflict. What it means to be Tuzlan is that we will live and work peacefully together. There was a large number of civic organizations that came together that were unlikely allies. This included a miners' union, local government officials, women's groups, a local radio station. Some groups mobilized to protect minority populations. Others mobilized to provide resources to the community to survive under siege, which the city was under for much time. And people focused on helping people work together. And they really also focused on addressing emerging risks. Whenever something happened, they were able to identify it early on by saying, we're hearing this in the miners' union. They had faith leaders. When the Mufti of Tuzla was kidnapped by a group of extremists, the Mufti's followers told the mayor they planned to retaliate by kidnapping the Catholic priest. He was able to intervene and convince them that he could handle the situation nonviolently, which he did. So here you have them asserting a Tuzlan identity, saying this is what it means to be Tuzlan, getting so many different groups of people in the society on board to do so, and influencers across a range of groups and institutions and types of communities in the city. And then they coordinated to respond to anything that could threaten that. They set social norms and expectations for peace. A second story that I'll share quite quickly is the story of the Muslim community in Rwanda during the genocide in Rwanda, which killed hundreds of thousands, upwards of a million civilians, mostly Tutsis and some moderate Hutus. And while organized militia groups led the violence, the broader public participated widely. However, there is a unique case of an entire community that resisted participation and instead rescued victims, and this was Rwanda's Muslim community. And what happened here is something that is different, but in many ways similar. If we can go to the next slide. One of the reasons there was so much public participation is that Hutu communities experienced strong social pressure to participate in violence through radio broadcasting, through their local social networks, through coercion and social pressure and threats of what would happen if you didn't participate. In the Muslim community, Muslim leaders early on saw the type of rhetoric that was leading to violence and started speaking to their community in the months in advance. They used every platform they had. The genocide happened after Ramadan, so they used every community convening that was happening. They posted public pastoral letters. They spoke at the mosques. They spoke at madrasas, the religious school, and they framed the deepening divisions as a test of faith, as a test of being a good Muslim. So it's not that there's such a threat, we have no choice but to turn against each other. They said any division, any ethnic divisions are a threat and a test of our faith. To be a good Muslim means that we always resist participation in violence and we always protect potential victims. And indeed, this community collaborated together to rescue people, to ferry them across water to, and Muslim and non-Muslim Tutsis. They provided people shelter in mosques, and they did so at great risk to themselves, sometimes even at the cost of their lives. There are pretty amazing stories. For the sake of time, I just want to take us to the next slide and talk about common themes across these case studies. And again, these are case studies of extreme instances of violence. They are small communities that showed resistance and resilience, even amidst a civil war, even amidst a genocide. And I think it's important to look at the extremes so that we can see what's possible, but again, so that we can take lessons that show us what we can do to prevent violence and address violence further upstream, right? When it's not gotten to such extreme levels. What we see in common across these communities and across many other case studies of more and even less extreme violence is that leaders anticipate escalating tensions and conflict and make early preparation for action. And they do that by building important relationships between diverse leaders and communities. And when they, ranging from that miners' union to the faith leaders to people that could work with the police force to a radio station, when you have those trusted to the mayor, when you have those trusted relationships and people that can coordinate and collaborate in real time, you also have the ability for them to communicate in ways that reach diverse audiences and mobilize people, prevent them from that silencing and suppression. And what they all did is they activated a cross-cutting identity that was an alternative to the identity being mobilized for violence, right? In Tuzla, they said, it's not about our ethnic community or our religious community, which was the things that were being divided. We're Tuzlan, and this is what it means to be Tuzlan. They used their geographic identity. In Rwanda, where it was ethnicity that was being used to divide, they used religion to unite. I've seen other cases where people use the identity of being mothers, or they create a new brand or movement that brings people together. And instead of feeling lonely and alone, and the fear that comes with having to act alone in a contentious moment, people get to be part of something and belong somewhere and act through that belonging. in addition to bringing people together through activating cross-cutting identities that didn't also make them let go of their existing identities that were important. It just made a different one more salient. They set really strong social norms and expectations and pressures against violence. And often what happens with violence is loud and it grabs headlines. And the type of rhetoric that promotes it can often seem, because it's so loud, because it creates a story, it can create the misconception that most people want or support it. And one of the most important things is to reclaim back that narrative and that story of who we are in these confusing moments. People often behave in ways that go along with what they see as the social pressure or their group. And so in these cases, they proactively set strong norms to say, this is who we are. We are a group of people that refuses to turn against each other and takes care of our neighbors. And so much of this resonates with what you all do with welcoming. So they set strong norms and corrects the misperception that violence was dominant, and they monitored and responded to events as they occurred. I will do one more slide. I will go very, very quickly just to say, sorry, next one. This will be my last one. I just want to say we have a lot of resources and can share them and can share some in the chat about responding to scapegoating. But when it comes to designing communication that can respond, thinking about messengers and reach is really important. But some of the really key pieces of communication in response to this type of targeting and scapegoating is to center and support targeted communities, showing a sense of solidarity, and to highlight what this is, right? Not to buy into the framework of, is this group threatening or not, but to say, this is the use of scapegoating, of dehumanization to target people in order to divide us or for political gain. There's a whole set of reasons why scapegoating gets used by conflict entrepreneurs, and I'll share a handout that has more information. But really highlighting the standing together with communities, the goals of the scapegoating itself, and building a sense of agency so that people don't feel disengaged, disenfranchised, at a loss, but showing we can do something, right? This, again, activating those shared identities to say, we, the people of this community or members of this faith or whatever it is, this is who we are. People in uncertain times gravitate to leaders that say, this is who we are. So give that sense of certainty. This is who we are, and you can belong here by taking these positive actions and really reshaping that positive social pressure to create a sense of momentum standing up against scapegoating. And towards a better way forward, towards solidarity, towards the dignity and respect for all people. I'll stop there. I know it was a lot. I hope it's helpful to tee up some of the amazing examples we'll hear next.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think you've given us a really fabulous analysis to draw from and also some really practical strategies that I think are going to get really perfectly grounded in our next set of speakers. I wrote down act through belonging, and I think that is a great call to action for all of us, and also a great way to introduce our next speaker, who is Min Sao. Z founded and leads as CEO and president the Center for Economic Opportunity and Belonging in Utah, and prior to that led the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in Salt Lake County. Her work to advance belonging and equity in an environment that is both racially and politically diverse is, I think, a real proof point for the spirit of possibility in navigating the complexity of welcoming in challenging times and places. And more importantly, I really can't think of another leader whose wisdom, grace, force, and ethos around what it means to belong, which is what Z brings in every encounter we have with her, which are many, is just so formidable and so needed in this moment. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Z, to talk about your work in Utah, which I think will echo very well some of what Rachel just shared.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of this conversation today. This is really important conversation and much needed in what we have experienced in the past 2 or 3 weeks. And Rachel Brown, thank you so much for your presentation and really grounding us to what we are seeing today. And well, I think we'll continue to see as we work towards the election. I think one thing is for sure is that what we're witnessing is a mass polarization of divide, not only just in America, but around the world to around the world. The scarcity mindset of fearing of the unknown during this period is really causing the division that we're seeing, the escoping, Rachel used the word conflict entrepreneurs that are really using this moment to really divide us. This momentum about the word of othering, and we've been using and working and studying alongside with the Othering and Belong Institute at UC Berkeley, and this phrase about the othering of others is really resonating with us right now and the work that we're doing on the grounds. Also want to share that some positive things that as a community, as a welcoming community, and as a practitioner who's been working in this space for so many years, I do want to say that we have a lot of the great infrastructures already in place, and we have so much assets as a community to be able to think about ways that we can do to support our communities. First and foremost, identifying those strategies to help us move forward. And then I think the most important piece of this is that being able to help us paint a future that is brighter than what the conflict entrepreneurs are introducing for us right now. And so today, I really want to just highlight some of the best examples of strategies we've been implementing in the state of Utah, understanding the environment that we work in, the division that we're seeing in the community, but also knowing as a community, we all truly are a caring community, and it's a matter of bringing us back together to be able to think about what we can do collectively. I want to emphasize on two specific strategies that we've been thinking about in the state. One is around this idea of narrative. Who is telling the narrative? What narrative is missing from the conversation? And how do we overcome the challenges of this fear mentality that the conflict entrepreneurs are causing right now or introducing to a community right now? And how do we combat that? And so around narrative change, we're approaching this in several ways. One is bringing us back together and say, who is in the communities right now, and how do we tell the story of all the positivity that is happening in the community? So just to provide a couple of examples of work that we have done, recently we partnered with the Utah Historic Society as part of Welcoming Week. We invited immigrants to come in and tell their stories about and the contributions to Utah and the place that they live right now. And that was really successful because it really provides a mechanism for people to see that Utah is a place that they could belong and or welcome here, but that now they belong and they also contributed. So it was a pretty easy. It was a great event where we're partnering with a state agency, be able to just really lift up the stories of the immigrant stories. Another way that we're accompanying the idea of narrative change is really to make sure that all stories are included in a history, and not just one set of stories. And so currently partnering with another agency, we have hired 2 fellows who are of immigrant background themselves to really write down what is missing from the immigrant story in the state of Utah. In addition to that, really highlight some of the very successful policies that we have passed in the past decade in supporting immigrants. I think as a community, as the first county to receive certification, the welcoming certification, we have a lot of things that we could share. And so a strategy around really thinking about how do we really change the narrative to be able to help people understand that together we can paint a society that is better than what the other side is telling us is really important. The second area that we're focusing on is around bridging. And this is really important to us, especially given the polarization that we're seeing, the division that we're seeing in the community. And just to take a step back in defining what bridging is. Bridging is not really about bringing people together who believe in what you believe in together to have the conversation. Bridging is about bringing people who have opposite ideas together. It's not about persuading the other person to buy into your ideas. Bridging is about listening, it's about connections. And I think this is really important piece of it that we have to focus on as a society in all aspects, around immigration, around just all aspects of a community. And so as a community, we have been partnering with a lot of organizations throughout the state to bring people of different ideas together. Just last Saturday, we partnered with the mayor's office in Salt Lake City, the governor's office, an organization called Braver Angels. And we conducted a seminar bringing individuals who have different views together around on a conversation on immigration. And it was about seeking common grounds and building on a couple of ideas that Rachel have shared earlier, is that if you are able to find the common values that we share, it's so much easier for us to move together. And it's very interesting as we engage with the community in conversations and bringing people who are differences together to discover the shared values. At many cases, we have more in common than we think. Just another quick story. Last December, we brought together 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats on a state legislature together on a very, very controversial topic. When we put them together on a conversation, we did not know that they did not know, and we weren't sure. But at the end of the trainings, they actually were able to identify, 70 a set of values they agree on, which was amazing because many of them have not talked to each other before. And so this idea of bringing people together, making the intentional effort of bridging those who are different than you is really a strategy that we been practicing in Utah. I also want to also want to go into a little bit deeper into about bridging. And so we're in Utah, we're doing both short bridges as well as building long bridges. And the idea of short bridges is really just bringing together to think about how we can take action moving forward. Those are really important pieces that we're doing. So we identify the workshop that we did on last Saturday as kind of building those short bridges, but also thinking about how do we build the long bridges. The long bridges are those bridges that will take a lot longer to do, but we have to get started somewhere and at some point. And so we are bringing people together to talk about topics that we know we won't get to consensus immediately, but we have to continue to build a connection on how we can move forward to combat the division that we're seeing in the community today. Those are really 2 really good examples we have. One other thing I really want to highlight is the importance of the intersectionalities of the work that we do. We have been doing a lot of work around building bridges and making sure that immigrants, refugees, new Americans are accepted, are being welcome and belong in the state of Utah. But we're also thinking that people have multiple identities, and being able to identify how do we bring those multiple identities together so that we can build an alliance together that could build a stronger community that would withstand the division that we are seeing today. And I'll conclude with those comments, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I think we all know that it takes incredible leadership to move this work, and especially now more than ever. And I'm so grateful every day for yours. Thank you again for joining us today. As we were putting this call together, one of the stories we wanted to make sure was part of it is the story of Dayton, Ohio, which is really just a stone's throw from Springfield, Ohio, and also one of the places that was targeted, as I said earlier. And I'm so glad that Jeanette Horowitz with the Welcome Dayton Initiative could be here today, to share some of what they've been experiencing in Dayton, how they've been navigating that, and Dayton's long history in welcoming and persevering through many election cycles and many challenges, but also, with just an incredible success story around building an infrastructure that has enabled a more resilient response to demographic change and to political rhetoric, I think is a real beacon in this moment. So, Jeanette, thank you again for being with us. I'm going to turn over to you now.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me and for setting up this fantastic webinar in the first place. So I'm just going to share very briefly a little bit of what happened to Dayton in the aftermath of Springfield. And as Rachel mentioned, we're very close to Springfield, about a 20-minute car ride. We had an incident on September 14th, a couple of days after the presidential debate, where Senator Vance retweeted a tweet that was quite insensitive about African migrants in Dayton and involving pets. And so our immediate response to that was our police department put out a statement completely refuting what had happened, what was claimed. And our mayor did the same thing. And we made sure that we shared that out to the community quickly and just letting the community know we do not tolerate this. And this is absolutely false. And this is not what Dayton is about. And so we had a lot of discussions also that weekend of what else do we need to do? We had already taken steps to address the narrative this year, being that it's an election year. We knew that there likely will be lots of false narratives around immigrants and immigration, and we want to make sure that we correct that. So it's something that we had talked about a lot in months leading up to this fall. It was welcoming week when this happened, so I guess I'll say, fortunately, we already had many events and activities and various things going on that sort of could help with the narrative right there and then. We had our mayor put out a welcoming statement for Welcoming Week. We had panel discussions with immigrants and refugees scheduled, all sorts of other events, which absolutely helped. We've also done a lot of social media outreach, just sharing, again, the stories of immigrants who are here in Dayton, who they are, what they do, what they bring to our community, sharing facts. For example, we had naturalization ceremony during Welcoming Week that we attended, shared pictures, shared stories of those being naturalized, but then also sharing facts of numbers of individuals who are naturalized each year in the United States. Facts about immigrants' contribution economically to the state of Ohio. So again, just putting out a lot of facts during this time has been quite helpful. We were also fortunate to, before any of this happened, in mid-August, be contacted by a reporter with NPR who came to Dayton for 2.5 days and did a story on immigrants and their contributions to our city. And that was published a couple of days after we had the incident with Senator Vance's tweet. So we've been able, again, to just push out a lot of really positive narratives, which has been really helpful. I'll mention a couple of other items real quick, too, that we're doing. Welcome Dayton is part of the City of Dayton's Community Engagement Division. And the mission of community engagement is to engage with the community. So we're very happy to be part of that particular division. And we have been that now for about 3.5 years. And so we do a lot to make sure that we include immigrants and refugees with what's going on in the city. So for instance, we have a Neighborhood Leadership Institute that happens once a year, 13-week-long leadership program that we actively recruit immigrants and refugees to participate in, to make sure that they have a voice in what's going on at the city level. We invite them to neighborhood meetings, to business association meetings if they have a business in the neighborhood. We invite them to our president's forum that takes place quarterly with all the neighborhood presidents in the city. So we're trying really hard to make connections and give an opportunity for people to really get to know each other. I would say just in closing that I think it's really important to be proactive. And that's something that we've really tried to always be, even more so now with this being a presidential election year, and finding ways that we can bring people together, have conversations, even if they're challenging, finding ways that people in our community can be welcoming. We are starting a welcoming provider initiative in Dayton, whereby organizations and businesses can sign up to kind of go through a checklist to see what are you doing to be welcoming, so that welcoming is part of what everyone does here, whether it's a little or a lot, but everybody is part of it, and we feel like that's very important too. So I think I'll leave it there. Again, like I said, we acted quickly when we had the issue with the tweet, and figured out ways to deal with that. And now we're discussing ways to prepare if it happens again, and what are the best ways to deal with it. But open communication, I think, is important. We've reached out to immigrant refugee leaders, speaking with them, letting them know we are here. We take this seriously. We're here to help you. Let us know how we can be there for you, and so forth. So I will leave it at that. I know we have another speaker. Thank you so much, Rachel, again, and everyone, for having me.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Thank you for your leadership, for Dayton's leadership. There's so much in your remarks around, I think, what we can all be doing to play the long game and to be reinforcing positive norms in communities in a lot of different ways. And that's the longstanding work you've been doing, and I know will continue to do. And that is a perfect segue to our last speaker. And Eric, I think you're going to be closing us out here. And I just want to very quickly introduce you and say that Eric Ward is an executive vice president with Race Forward, and is a nationally recognized expert on the relationship between authoritarian movements, hate violence, and preserving inclusive democracy. And besides many leadership roles, he is the recipient of the Southern Poverty Law Center's 2021 Civil Courage Prize, the first American to receive that award. And I have to say is probably one of the most inspiring leaders I know, in the way that he relentlessly challenges us from a place of moral imagination and courage. And I'm so thrilled that you could be here with us today, Eric, on this call. And one thing I want to do as you're talking is share an article you just shared with me about this moment that we're in, which I know you're going to be speaking to us about now. So I will turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, my friend, and thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be with you today. We find ourselves at a critical moment, one that challenges our values, our communities, and our resolve to create a future where everyone belongs. Today, I want to talk about how we meet these challenges, not as isolated groups, but as united community determined to build something better. We've seen this before. In the early 1990s, Germany experienced one of its most significant outbreaks of racial violence in post-war history, the Rostock-Lichtenhagen riots. A mob attacked an apartment block where mostly Vietnamese workers lived, throwing stones and firebombs. Hundreds of onlookers stood by, some cheering as the violence unfolded. It was not just an attack on those individuals. It was an attack on the community as a whole. It left scars that still linger in that community today, a reminder of what happens when fear and hatred are allowed to spread unchecked. The lesson is clear. We cannot afford to be bystanders. Our silence in the face of hatred gives it space to grow. We've also seen this in South Africa between 2016 and 2022, when waves of xenophobic violence targeted immigrants from other African countries. The violence didn't just harm the people directly affected, it disrupted entire neighborhoods. It caused significant economic setbacks and it eroded the trust people had in one another. When these events unfolded, they did just not represent an attack on immigrants. They were an attack on everyone's sense of safety and community. It showed us how easily division can take root and how, if left unchecked, it affects us all. More recently in the United Kingdom, the rise of anti-immigrant rhetoric and disinformation has tried to pit communities against each other. This hasn't just made immigrants unsafe. It has torn at the social fabric, breaking down trust and cohesion that communities need to thrive. These stories from Germany, South Africa, and the UK are not just tales from far off places. They are warnings and lessons for us here. The attacks on immigrants and refugees today are not just an attack on them, they are an attack on us all. And I'm going to continue to say that. They test whether we allow fear to break down our neighborhoods and threaten our shared prosperity, or whether we hold firm to the belief that our strength lies in standing together. When the alt-right white nationalists gathered in Portland, Oregon, it was an attempt to intimidate and divide us here in the city that I live. The protests were marked by violence, and they exposed real vulnerabilities in our Portland community. The goal wasn't just to target the left or to target minorities or immigrants or the LGBTQ community. It was to create an atmosphere of fear that could turn us against one another. There were moments when it felt as if hate might win, as if the divisions were too deep and the forces of extremism too strong. But even in that darkness, we saw glimpses of what is possible when we refuse to be divided. People from all backgrounds showed up, not just to oppose hate, but to support each other. Local businesses opened their doors to protect those who felt threatened. Neighbors organized safety teams. These weren't grand gestures, but they mattered. They showed us that even when fear tries to pull us apart, there is power in unity. My Portland story is also a warning, but it is also a story of resilience. It shows that both the dangers we face and the incredible strength we have when we choose to come together. This is what resilience looks like. It's the community in Dayton, Ohio, which after being targeted didn't retreat in fear. Instead, they built stronger connections. They are strengthening partnerships and made sure everyone knew they belonged. It looks like Springfield, where the response to hate isn't just reactive. It is also about taking the necessary steps to make the community stronger for the future. These efforts are not just reactive to crisis. They are models for cities across the United States. Every time we as leaders respond to hate with unity, we are showing others how it can be done. We can provide a blueprint for how communities come together in times of crisis. To do that, though, we have to change our mindset. We have to consider every attack as an opportunity for a city to show what it stands for, to demonstrate that our values of inclusion, safety, and community aren't just words, but the actions we live by. And this isn't just about doing what's right, it's also practical. When we come together, when community leaders, businesses, and governments work side by side, we all benefit. We get safer streets where neighbors look out for one another. We get healthier communities where people feel they belong and are more likely to contribute, whether it's at school, at work, or in public life. And when businesses, governments, and community groups work together, our local economies get stronger. Small businesses do better because people feel confident in their neighborhoods. and investments come in where there is stability. We are in this for the long haul. This work is not about one election or one moment of crisis. It is about laying the foundation for the kind of society we want to build for our children and our grandchildren. It is about making sure that our neighborhoods are places of opportunity, that our economies are resilient, and that our collective future is of one promise. Let me share a personal reflection. I remember standing in a neighborhood meeting a few years ago after an incident that had left people scared. We were all strangers in that room, but as we began to talk, share our stories, and understand each other's fears, something changed. People who had never spoken to each other before made commitments to stand together. It was not an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. And that moment of connection, of building trust from the ground up, is what has allowed that community to face challenges since then. It is in these moments that we find our power. It's these small but profound actions that hold our communities together and push us forward. I want to ask each of you to take a moment now to think about your own neighborhoods. Think about the people you see every day, the families, the elders, the children. What kind of community do you want from them? What kind of future do you want to build for them? This work begins with each of us, making that commitment to stand up for one another. I know that these challenges can feel overwhelming, but we have faced challenges before, and we have found ways to overcome them. We have seen fear used as a weapon, and we have countered it with care, courage, and with action. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, those who fought for civil rights, for equality, and for justice. The work we do today is part of that same legacy, and it is just as vital. Today, I'm asking each of you, remember your power. As business leaders, you have the ability to create opportunities, foster environments where people of all backgrounds can succeed and invest in the future of our communities. As government officials, you have the power to enact policies that protect, uplift, and ensure fairness. And as community leaders, you have the power to bring people together, to build bridges and remind us of our shared humanity. To meet this moment means seeing our differences as strengths. It means understanding that each of us has a role to play, that even small actions matter. And it means knowing that we are not just fighting against something, we are building something better. We are building a future that is stronger, more inclusive, and more hopeful because of what we do together. Be the leader this moment needs. Stand up for what is right, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. Speak out for those who are targeted and act in ways that make our communities stronger. Let's ensure that when history looks back at this moment, it doesn't just see the hate that tried to divide us, but the care, the courage, and the solidarity that brought us together. Let's show that we are committed to a future that includes everyone, to safety that leaves no one out, and a community we can all be proud of. We are still here. We are thriving. We are united, and we are unbreakable. Together, we will keep moving forward. We will build the future that everyone deserves, a future where every person, every family, and every community can flourish. Finally, but of most importance, thank each of you. I want to thank each of you for your courage, for your commitment, and for being the change we need. Now let's get out there. Let's meet this moment. Let's build something extraordinary together.
Thank you, Eric. I think all that is left to say now is amen and a huge thanks to all of our speakers for your leadership, for modeling as positive role models these values today. We all stand in the stream of history, and I hope pass the torch on to the next generation with exactly the values all of you have talked about. I want to thank my colleagues, Anthony Salas and Cassie Harding, for supporting this webinar, for each and every one of you for being with us today. And let's get out there and do what's right in this moment. Thank you all.